Hi, Layla. I'm,
Hi.
I'm Mitchell, Mitchell Jackson. Uh, I am a writer. I was born and raised in Portland, which I'm really proud about that. And I am also on the board of literary arts, but even before that, felt like a, um, a part of the family. Um, and I'm really excited to get a chance to talk to you.
Hi. My name is Layla. Layla Vickers. I am also a writer. I just say like round artist. I do arts of the many mediums, but in my heart, I'm a poet for sure. I also am growing up in the Portland area as of right now. So yeah, what initially made you start your journey of writing?
I mean, it's almost shameful. I think, and I'd be interested to hear why you wanted to become a writer, but I got into writing for the wrong reason. I, uh, I didn't even want to be a writer. I wanted to write a book because I thought it would be really cool to be from Northeast Portland and to write a book. And by that time, I had kind of given up on my basketball dreams. I was in prison. So I had a lot of marks against me. And I thought, here's one thing that I might be able to do at that point, I didn't know anyone else who even aspired to do that, much less had done it. And so I set out to write a book, which actually became The Residue Years. Um, but the strange thing about that is it really was me setting out to write a book and not becoming a writer. It took me years to figure out what it meant to be a writer, which is, reading and writing and living a literary life and caring about the world, being curious, like all of those things I didn't have when I first started writing Residue Years. And so I learned um, by being in graduate school and by associating with other writers who were serious what it really meant to be one.
Yeah.
But you're young, so when did you know, or I don't know if you know now. Yeah, I guess you say if you're a poet. Well, that's one thing I'm always interested in is that when a person writes poetry, they say I am a poet as if it's like a part of their identity. And usually when a person writes prose, they say I write fiction,
Yeah.
and that's
It's
not
very,
necessarily who they are. But when did you know that you were going to be a writer?
um, I would say it started pretty young. I was like an only child, so really only had stories to tell myself to. I would
Hmm.
say my first writings weren't like on a book or a page or anything. It was like in the dollhouse, like, writing and creating stories there. The
Yeah.
most crazy stories, but like stories in a dollhouse, and then like starting to write down little things that I saw here and there. And I was a big reader. I think that really what ties in to me at being a writer is my mom always made me read a lot and stuff. So I was just
Hmm.
constantly reading and then being like, oh, I want to write something like that. But what really taught me how to be a poet was when I performed in fourth or third grade our deepest fears
Hmm.
for my talent show. And that wasn't something that I personally wrote, but I was like, saw the effect it had on people when I performed it,
Yeah.
and then wanted to have my own words do something like that. So I wrote
Yeah.
my first poem. I think it was like My Hair, something like that. And it was in fourth or fifth grade. And that just kind of like really set it off. And then I yeah, I really did a lot of poetry from that on, especially in like middle school and stuff, and now. But when I started more writing like stories, I would
Hmm.
say instead of like poetry, would be in sixth grade, like a creative writing class, and we were doing like imaginative stories and narrative stories, and I did not like expository stories for like English class, but these stories where I gotta like build characters really like set it off for me.
Yeah.
And sometimes I love to like write characters about like people that I see, just like, off the top of my head and stuff. So I think really reading is what made me become a writer, but wanting to affect people like with my words. I think that's why I say I am a poet, is
Yeah.
because I'm like I'm a writer, but I will be like I'm a writer, but I'm also a poet because I
Yeah.
feel like to me those are very different. Like you're both writing, but it's a different feel of sharing your work
Yeah.
because people are going to hear my work the way I want them to hear it.
Hmm.
Um, Doing slam poetry,
Yeah.
um, rather than people interpreting it the way they want to, which I also think is cool. But yeah,
Um, I was just thinking about something that you said. I never performed poetry. I wrote a couple of poems. I'm definitely not a poet. But one of the things that I was thinking about is the feedback that one gets from slam poetry is a kind of high, right? Like it's a high energy. Um, it's immediate, right? Like you say a
yeah,
poem and immediately you get the feedback from it. People
yeah,
clap, and then I was thinking, for a prose writer, you never. I mean, you may never get that kind of immediate feedback or adulation for your work, right? Like if you go to just like a regular book reading, I mean, they may clap for you at the end, maybe, but like generally, there won't be any snapping or clapping or you just read your work and somebody might come and say I really like that, but yeah, I was thinking about how that kind of feedback to your work can influence what you write, how you write, the feeling that you're looking for when you write, right?
yeah,
And working on a long thing too. Like, I worked on the residue years for 12 or 13 years,
yeah,
and no one was. I mean, very few people were seeing it, right? So I wasn't reading it out in the
yeah,
world. So there was no feedback of that kind of encouragement to say like, "Oh yeah, you should keep going. This thing will be good." So
yeah.
yeah, I just thinking about that you got an advantage in poetry, but you move over to writing stories, they might not be clapping the same.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think I'm also like I do theater. A big thing of me is drama. And
Uh-huh.
so I think having that feedback while I'm performing,
Yeah.
for like acting, reading somebody else's words or my own is like
Yeah.
very needed. I call it like my theater kid ego.
Yeah.
But it's like almost a necessity for me to be like having
Hmm.
that like staring at people's eyes and like saying my words and saying like whatever poem I'm doing. I think the longest poem that I like ever wrote that like I wasn't so sure about, kind of like how you say you're writing. It's a little different than writing for 13 or 14 years, but it was like this 5 minute poem for eighth grade. And
Hmm.
I remember we had a workshop it for a really long time.
Yeah.
And so people would like read it, but I would almost have to perform it to them to see how they like which parts they were interacting with more, like which ones
Yeah.
they really like felt drawn into. And I think that's what I like love most about poetry. But I also love the like intimacy with oneself with writing. I think it's a lot
Hmm.
more personal and reflective by like reading or writing pieces.
Yeah.
Um, I have another question as we keep on going.
Yeah.
So obviously, we're both from Portland,
Yeah.
and what do you think your biggest influences here helped you become a writer, or just biggest influences in Portland for your growing up? Yeah.
Um, well, at this very moment on my desktop, there is a story that I'm writing for a magazine about my friend group, which is it has a name. It's called the 833 Crew, and they're guys that I grew up with from the time we were like bitty balls, so elementary school. A lot of them I met in middle school and high school, but so 30 and 40-year friendships, and my interactions with them really shaped a lot of my youth. And so I would argue that that those people or those guys, it's about 11, 12 of them, are, even though none of them are writers and none of them knowingly or expressly were trying to shape my life as a writer, they still did because I write about those experiences. And oftentimes when I need to revisit them, like we have a thread, a text thread, and I'll seed the text thread with a story and say, what do you all remember about this? And then immediately I'll get more feedback from them. And the other thing I would say, another great influence on me, and this is again connected to them, is I was an SEI. I know you know what self enhancement is. So I was not an SEI kid as if I went to the school, but I worked at SEI for the summers, and I went to the SEI basketball camps, and that was such a great influence. And even the guys who started it, Tony Hobson and Ray Leary, and Ricky Allen, they were like father figures to me back then, and they really, for as much as I kept on the straight and narrow, which wasn't that much, obviously, because I ended up going to prison. I count them as really responsible for helping guide me and shape me, but not just me, like a whole, not even one generation, generations of young people have come through SEI and had the imprint of what Ray and Tony and Mr. Allen were able to achieve. So I'm really thankful for them. And then the other thing is just being from Northeast Portland, and especially now realizing how much, how different it is from when I grew up, and really in investigating that. Like I probably could spend the rest of my career really writing about why Oregon is the way that it is, racially, culturally, ethnically, and I might spend the rest of my time writing about those stories.
Yeah, for sure. I as soon as you like mention SEI, so many. I also didn't go to SEI, but I like as a like student, but I did so many events there.
Mm-hmm.
I've like gone to so many summer camps there. Like I
Yep.
totally understand that connecting to like community in Portland and especially how important it is for Black people.
Yeah.
Um, just because I mean, people say there's little of us, but we're here, and it's
Right.
just finding those spaces where we are here. I would say some of my biggest influences personally in Portland, like that helped me become a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say this would be like cliche, but like my mom, obviously, Shabri,
Yeah.
um, she's a writer herself, and she's always like giving me feedback on stuff, which is really important. But like I said before, she was the one who gave me lots of my books, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of my books, like I remember she told me about this one time about when I was really young, and I was like, why do you always give me books with Black people in it? I wasn't like asking, like I didn't want books with Black people in it, but I was just curious. And she was like, I have to teach you somehow that you are like seen and you're here. And I think that was really important to my
Yeah.
writing style and just like me as a person. But I
Yeah.
want to ask you, like, being in Portland and like being a Black man in Portland, how has that shaped how you are as a writer? I feel like we kind of, to get into this more, how has that shaped you as a writer and like the voice that you use through your writing?
Um, well, I think one of the things I remember when I wrote a story years ago. It must have been like 2011 for Salon magazine, and I titled the story actually "Survival Math." It ended up becoming the title essay for my essay collection. I titled it "Survival Math," but when they retitled it "Growing Up Black in the Whitest City in America." And at the time, I didn't. I mean, I knew that Portland was white, but I didn't know that it was that white that people considered it the whitest city in America. And so I immediately began to investigate Oregon's history and Oregon's whiteness and all of these things that were a part of what shaped my experience that I just had no clue about. And again, that goes back to me not really. I wasn't a reader when I was young, and I certainly wasn't a writer. So I wasn't curious in that way. I would only come across information if somebody like handed it to me. And even then, if you handed me some information, I might not go the extra step to figure out its context. And so I didn't realize how much race and racism had shaped my experience. And the more that I investigate that experience of growing up in Oregon, the more I find out about how it shaped my experience, the more I have to write. And also, what has happened in Portland is a microcosm for what happened in so many other places. So by writing about home, I'm also writing about America. And James Baldwin spent a whole career writing about what was happening in America. And I think the one of the unique things is that I remember when I used to tell people, oh, I'm from Oregon, they were like, wow, like y'all have black people there. I've never met anyone black from there.
Yep.
There's always there is the unknown experience, right? It's not explored, and I'm sure that there were writers, black writers before me, um, you know, writing novels and essays and nonfiction books, but I didn't know them. And so I was kind of writing out of a void. And I think the benefit now is that there are so many, like the slant. One of the great things about literary arts is how it is nurturing young writers and especially nurturing writers of color, right? So that there will never be another group of young people of color who come out of Oregon who say, well, there shouldn't be, that come out of Oregon and say, I don't know any other writers of color. Like, I don't know who came before me and what they were writing about. And I think that's a really important thing, that I'm part of your legacy and you're part of the next person's legacy. So no one gets to tell this story again like I'm telling.
Yeah. Yeah, I that's such an important thing, especially just like knowing that there's like writers who look like you. I think that's really important. I
Yeah.
We talk a lot about having representation in writing, like
Mm-hmm.
characters, which I think is also super important, but having like the author behind those characters
Yeah.
be representation as well, because then that representation can be more true to the experience. Even if it's like, as a writer, you're not writing about yourself, you're writing about a different character or
Yeah.
different experiences that you might not have experienced, but you understand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's still a lot more truthness to those characters, um, and authenticity that like young kids of color really need. And I also think that literary arts is a great way of doing that. Personal story, I they had the I can't remember, but it was some share one page Wednesday. That was it, one page Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom took me to it so I can share the poem that I was working on in eighth grade before I wrote it, before I spoke it out loud. It was very, very rough draft.
Mm-hmm.
And like all of the writers in there were kind of like a lot of old white people.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like the only young person in there. But even if I was the only young person in there, that opportunity was still available to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really important is having opportunities available for youth, because often as like as a youth writer, you're like, oh well, I can't like I'm not gonna be able to get like a book going right now. You know what I mean? I'll have to wait a few years. Let me like start writing something in college and then I could do it. But I can start writing now
Yeah.
and then still be successful, um, even if I was 20 or 30 or 40 writing. Um, and literary arts gives that availability for success early on, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
Um, oh, do you have something to say?
Well, I was just thinking about when I was growing up how much how many avenues were available to get better as an athlete. Every young man or adult was a coach or was working kids out or sending you up to the park, or there was always someone available to help you become a better athlete. And at that point, I didn't know anyone who was trying to help young kids become writers. I remember we used to have this thing at the park at Irving Park called the Reading Tree, where you would go up there and you would read books, and they would give you gimps to make. They teach you how to make gimps. But that was about as far as it went nurturing reading. And there was no one saying you could be a writer and here are the steps that you can take to be a writer. So I do think what the youth programs are so important because if you don't have them, there are people who would never even know that that's a possibility in their life. And so that to me is the important thing. I often wonder what my life would look like had I recognized that writing was a possibility for me at 10 or 12 or 15 or even 20. And maybe it would not have turned out different. Maybe I would be worse off or something. But that possibility, I think, is very crucial. And I'm happy that there's an institution around that sees the value in making sure that young people have those kind of opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, growing up in Portland, obviously as a black person, is something to work around, and it is difficult to navigate at times. But I mean, I had the opportunity to go to an arts middle school,
Mm-hmm.
Devonshire Middle School, which really like set me off. Like I knew I liked arts, but as soon as I had that, and it's like PPS, so it's like it's a public school,
Yeah.
and as soon as I had that availability to like explore different arts, and like I went in there thinking I was gonna like be a dancer. I'm not a dancer now. I
Yeah.
dance my room, but so like I thought I was in there to be a dancer, and I was gonna do like, dancing, all this stuff. But that's not how it ended up. But not in a bad way, in a way that I was opened up to so many other art forms, which I think is really important. Like I think art is crucial to like children everywhere. I did a honors English like TEDx little thing about arts education and how important it is because it
Wow.
truly is like any kind of arts education. Um, Even to kids who like don't think they're into arts or like don't really care about art class, having that there anyway,
Mm-hmm.
um, can get like some kid who's like thinks that like, okay, I do football, I'm good at football, that's the only thing I can do.
Right.
And then they go to like a ceramics class and they're like, wait, I just made this like dope bowl, I can like do this now. And then they have two opportunities on their hands that they can also do simultaneously. And I think that's like
Yeah.
important to have. um yeah. So I agree, like arts is important. Obviously, I'm a big winner against writing because it's just made me into who I am and lets me and allows me to express so many things that I cannot like sometimes say out loud.
Yeah. I'm really interested in you've been studying writing, and you talked about performing, but I'm interested in your time in the classroom and what writing teachers have told you. Can you remember a particular piece of advice that has been um, instructional for you?
Yeah, I've always had really amazing English teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Um like that I can like I would subside like elementary because obviously I had a teacher who kind of did like every single subject. But once I got to middle school, um, I had this one English teacher. We call it literary arts, but language arts, not literary arts, language arts. But um, her name was Miss Watson, and she was like everybody's favorite English teacher, had like super quirky classroom and everything. But I remember her just like it wasn't her saying something, it was her really like appreciating and believing what I like wrote because since
Mm-hmm.
I did do poetry, I really like I was like, okay, I'm like I didn't really like expository. So I wasn't so sure I was good at other writing besides poetry. Like I knew I could write, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if it was like just stayed in creative writing kind of realm.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember her being super like just giving me really great feedback that was like beneficial. Even if she gave me feedback was like, okay, you need to start changing this and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Stuff that um just allowed me to look at like writing classes and being like, okay, I can also do this too. Like, I can also feel confident in these classes, and I don't just have to feel confident during like the poetry unit, which
yeah,
is only like last 2 weeks or something. But that's a different thing. But yeah, I can like feel really confident in these classes as well. And I think just her feedback and her energy and her as a person believing in me was a big thing.
yeah.
Um, yeah, how about you? Do you have any English teachers who, or any teachers
Oh,
in general who,
yeah, I've had a few. I call them mentors because I encountered a lot of the people who were really influential to me outside of uh, like a standard classroom. But I have someone like you. I said it's actually a writer named John Weidman, who's still writing, published his first book in, I believe, it's 1967. Still publishing. We used to share an editor for a few years. But he doesn't really say much to me. But what he does is he provides a model. So I'm always looking to see what he's written and what genre it is and what he's doing on the sentence level or structural level or on the level of idea. And it's so phenomenal. And oftentimes I'll write something and I'll think that I have done something unique, and I'll go back and read something that he wrote in 20, 30 years ago, and it's presaging what I've done. So it's also very humbling to know that this man is such a genius. And then I had another person, a guy named Gordon Lish, an editor, um, who used to call and give me like a rah rah cheer on my cell phone. He would say like, "I think you can be great, Mitchell. You can do it. Like you can beat them." And you don't really get that kind of um, encouragement, especially as a fiction writer. So that was a really I would say that the 2 or 3 years where that was happening, where we were in close contact, was the most influential time of my writing life. And even now, in my classrooms or when I'm sitting down to write, I can hear things that he espoused to me. This is probably what now 10 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago. So yeah, I think it's really great to have mentorship. It's also really essential to have encouragement, um, and then to learn how to read as a writer. I think that's really important. That's something that I talk about in my classrooms because there's a difference between like picking up a book and saying I want to read it because I love it, and then picking up a book and saying I want to read it to figure out what they're doing and how they did it and why they did it. And strangely, I've only ever read in the latter way. I've only ever read to figure out what someone was doing. So I probably missed out on a lot of that joy you experienced when you were young and your mom was giving you books. But it has been helpful in terms of being instructive for me because the thing about that kind of reading is everything you read becomes instruction. So you can kind of stay in school, which I think is necessary as a writer. I think the moment that you feel like I know what I'm doing, I got it made, like I can make this thing. One, if you feel that way and you do it, you're not challenging yourself. And two, there's only one way to go from there, and I think it's down, right? Because if you're repeating yourself, then you're not expanding. And so I'm always, even now as I sit down to write, like there's a fear that I have at staring at a blank page, and I've stared at so many blank pages, and still now I'm like, whoa, am I going to be able to do this again? And I don't know, maybe one day I won't, but I feel like if you give me enough time, the blank page will turn into a few words in a sentence in a paragraph, and if you let me keep shifting the paragraph around, eventually I can make something that I'm proud of. But it does not feel that way beginning a lot of times.
yeah, I think the writing process is always an interesting one because it's always like especially if you've written something good, and then you're like,
Mhm.
oh man, I don't know if it could be, I don't know what's gonna top this. I
I
don't,
can do that.
and
Yeah.
I think I really had to learn that, like, to not want to top my writing,
Hmm.
but like write something different, or just write something out of, like, I have ideas and I'm like, oh, I don't know if that's going to be as good as this last piece that I wrote, but just writing those anyway because they were ideas that I have. And
Yeah.
like, I've written some things that I probably wouldn't like want people to read,
Yeah.
but I wrote them anyway as like just little things that, like, I wanted to write this for myself. And even like with like poetry, I can constantly like, I've had this like battle recently where it's like, do I just write about being a black person in my, like, is that all of my poetry needs to be? I think that often as like writers of color and like a female and LGBTQ plus writer, like it's very much like, do I just write off of my identities, or do I also write off of like just being a human? I
Yeah.
think that's
Just
a
who you are.
big,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really big battle for sure.
Yeah. And I don't think it's ever going to go away. I mean, people are
Mm-mm.
always going to expect, I mean, it goes back to, well, I mean, before them, but certainly W.E.B. Du Bois and Alain Locke were having that conversation about what is the role of writing for writers of color. And Du Bois was like, well, it's art in the service of justice. Like you need to be writing some stuff that's going to liberate our people. And Alain Locke was like, well, the way to liberation is just to make good art, right? And so with my own work, I find myself somewhere in the middle, like knowing that I
Mm-hmm.
want the work to do something in the world, but then also really pursuing creating the kind of the best art that I can make. Which is strange when you said that they call it literary arts. I can't remember if they called it or language arts. I can't remember if they called it language arts when I was in school, but I'm thinking about how sage that is to remind students that the English language, it can be an art form, right? That you can take this language and it's malleable and you can make art from it rather than calling it English where there's like when I hear English I hear like strict rules,
Yep.
right? I think grammar, um, I think a really stringent, strict way of looking at language. And to be honest, that language was not meant for people from the African diaspora, right? Like that language was given to us um, as a form of subjugation, and so you certainly should master it. But I also know that it's not mine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I feel like some of the ways that I really get out of that slump of um like wanting to explore writing just as a writer, but also understanding that, like, I like not like I am the representation, but like once I write, I'm writing not like from the perspective of a black woman, but
Right.
as a black woman. And
Yeah.
so, how can I incorporate culture in there? How can I incorporate race? How can I incorporate gender? How can I incorporate all of these different things that make me who I am in a story that also, like, agrees with my creative writing
Yeah.
aspect? And I think one big thing that you said before was reading, like, because
Mhm.
you read to learn. And I've kind of like, sometimes I'll like read for pleasure and then be like, I want to write like that. Like, I want to
Mhm.
make somebody else feel like that. Like, what I recently read this book called Without Watching You. It was like a murder mystery. And I've
Mhm.
always been like wanting to write like this, some kind of like murder mystery, crazy story. Criminal Minds is my favorite show. So like, it's always like, something around murder mystery I've always wanted to write about. But like reading this story and like how it was all formed together, like I was reading it, I was enjoying it. But like after, I was just thinking of the way that this writer put this all together. And I was just like astonished, but I was also like, I want to do something where I can like totally shock an audience by the end.
Yeah.
But like I was also thinking about like, oh, this lady had no black characters. Oh, all these different things. And I was like, I mean, she's British, but like, you know what I mean? I was just like, how can I then as a writer like make my MC like a young black girl and put myself like aspects of myself in her because I know so many other people relate to that as well.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so I have a few other questions too that we can go on. This kind of ties into literary arts. So, why do you serve on the literary arts board of directors?
Um, I think it's the most important literary organization in Portland, probably in Oregon. So for me, as a native and someone who cares very much for home, I want to be a part of the organization that is, carrying the literary torch in the community. I also feel indebted to them for helping me in my career, especially with residue years, but just also kind of looking out for me and thinking about me in terms of opportunities. I'll never forget, I did a talk with Jasmine Ward at the Associated Writing Programs Convention, and that it's a very memorable event. Jasmine's a good friend, and it was great to get on stage with her. Um, and yeah, I am learning. I'm the newest board member, or one of the three newest board members. So I don't have all of the information. But one thing that I also admire is the commitment and the generosity, the commitment, and the enthusiasm of the other board members. And I've been on other boards where that wasn't necessarily the case. So I think, when I think about leadership and I think about people who love what they're doing, um, that's this board. And so whatever kind of goals are set forth for the organization, I think they're going to achieve them. And again, for me, if I can make a little Mitchell Jackson sooner, if I can make a little Mitchell Jackson without him having to go to prison to become a writer, like that is the goal. And I think Literary Arts is an organization that can help facilitate that.
What advice would you give to a young writer like me?
Um, the advice that I would give to a young writer would be um, to uh, to keep reading and never to get too um, never to fall in love with the work. Because I think if you fall in love with your work, you begin to lose sight of it, and you also begin to think it's so great that like I don't need to do anything to it, and that is really harmful in the revision process. Right? There is no piece of writing that cannot be improved by revision. Um, and whether or not you believe that, I do think at least most pieces of writing can be improved by revision. So I think you have to be able to view your work with a healthy dose of skepticism, but also with hope, right? Like hope that it can get better, skepticism that it might not be there yet. And also reading great work will help you uh, learn how to judge where it is in the process.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm definitely with that skepticism of one's work
Yeah,
because I've definitely had pieces where I like I'm so like used to it. I'm like I don't know, and then I'm like this can't. It's like I'm like I need to like not be in love with it, but be excited about it again.
yeah,
I think that's one thing of being a poet and like doing it like for like as like a little side hustle thing and like doing it for like people and stuff is you really have to like get excited about it again. So thank you for that.
hmm Well, let me ask you
What
one
are
question. Out,
okay
what are your hopes for the future?
for like the future
Let's
as a
talk
whole
about
of
the
the
future.
world?
Let's talk about the future of Portland.
Okay. I think my hopes for the future of Portland. There are a lot. Um,
Hmm.
I definitely I love living here. I think it's been a good place to grow up in.
Hmm.
Um, but there are little tweaks that I would do here and there. I really hope, rather than coming from criticism, but from love,
Hmm.
I hope that it becomes a place where, especially, I mean, I I feel like I always come from this lens of being a black queer girl, but
Hmm.
I want it to be a place where, um, young black girls, queer or not, are able to feel like they have people supporting them. Because I feel like often, even now in Portland, and my mom knowing so many people, and me being connected to so many people, and stuff like this, support and seeing of oneself in like like a positive light
Hmm.
still is not there a lot of the time. Um, and I think I've been very privileged with the like schools that I go to and stuff, and the people that I know from my mom again. But
Hmm.
I want also that experience for so many other people, where so many other black girls, where they feel like I'm connected to so many things in Portland, and I'm connected to so many people, and I have so many opportunities, rather than not feeling like you have a lot of opportunities. Um, I also hope that it's a lot more diverse of a city. I really do, because I mean, even when I remember, I'm the president of my school's BSU. I go to Central
Hmm.
Catholic, and we had a little like before school, like back to school kind of social thing with like parents and kids. And I was like so surprised there were so many black people there. I literally walked in and I was like, this is so many black people for like, and I don't want that to be a surprise anymore. And I
Yeah.
also don't want it to just be like, are there black people? Like, let's talk about like having a greater Asian population. I don't know if that like sounds weird, but like having diversity in different
Yeah.
areas of diversity, rather than just race and stuff like that. Having diversities of religion, diversities of thought, diversities of um, everything, I
Yeah.
think will make Portland such a great place, because really, the way that this city started, the way that this state started, didn't really set up for that path. And
Yeah.
so, how can we change that? Um, I hope our leadership looks a lot different in Portland too. I really hope that, and I hope our school systems give people the access and the means and the needs to be like not better people, but just be their best self,
Yeah.
which looks different all around. It doesn't mean like 99% graduation rate, which would be nice,
Yeah.
but that's not what greatness means for everyone. But just so people here feel like they're not left out. Um, yeah, that's what I hope for the future. I also hope for the future that more people are in housing that is safe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
How about you?
Oh, I didn't know you were gonna turn it back on me. What do I hope for? Um, I hope that there is some way to address the violence that is happening now by young people who are the sons, daughters, and nephews and nieces and grandchildren of the people that I grew up with. It's really disturbing. I was just there over the weekend, and there was a shooting um, downtown in a restaurant, and it's every time I come home, there's some tale of really brazen um, violence, and so while I'm really happy about the work that literary arts is doing, I also know that it's there needs to be some kind of outreach that is reaching a different segment of Portland, and for whatever reason that has not happened yet, um, and where the city is paying the cost for it. And so that's one of the hopes that I have, alongside whatever kind of literary um, outreach is happening in the organization.
Yeah, thank you for sitting down and talking to me too. I think it's really important to see people who I aspire to um, look after as role models and be able to talk to you face to face. I think that's just really dope. So thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me, even if
Right.
it's through a screen.